Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
And we're not live. We're live on tape. We're rolling.
That phrase always, I thought, was pretty interesting to me.
Live on tape?
Yeah. Is it?
It's interesting.
Is there a parallel universe where we're actually on a piece of tape? I don't know.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's every version of.
It would certainly be a mystical event if we were.
Hey, fun fact. That's what we're talking about. Mentalism and mysticism, right?
That's right.
But first,
word
from our sponsors
is a mental wealth tip.
The mental wealth tip of the day. I kind of feel like we should have some graphics.
Something to go along with that.
Yeah.
The mental wealth tip of the day is high stress events like trauma are encoded in the brain differently from ordinary life. And they are encoded much more like spiritual events. So if you have a lot of trauma on board and somebody tells you to meditate, you may encounter the trauma by activating that level of consciousness where the trauma is stored. So be very careful if you're working with trauma, and find somebody who actually knows how to do it.
I love it. I feel wealthier or more mental. I'm not sure.
Well, we talk about mental health like that it's the absence of symptoms. And I don't think that's health. I like wealth better, mental wealth, if you are expanding into the parts of the mind that, that we don't ordinarily go, but are equally valuable.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people wander around their whole life searching for the scent of themselves, and the unexamined life is not worth living kind of thing doesn't apply. And maybe they're generally happy people. It's just not where they are on their path. But I think that there's so much unhappiness and fear and distrust and a lot of yucky stuff. We got to start getting medicine and antidotes for. Spiritual medicine, not the...
Robert Johnson, the great Jungian analyst and author, actually commented on exactly what you're saying. He said that there were 3 levels of transformation. First one was Don Quixote. He fights windmills. He thinks they're dragons. He always wins. He's a happy dude. Then there's Hamlet. That's where most of us are these days. To be or not to be. Hamlet knows that his uncle killed his father and is sleeping with his mother, but he doesn't really know what to do about it. So he's a melancholy Dane. And then the third one is Faust, Goethe's Faust. And Faust is this very arid, dry German professor who gets pretty fed up with his life, makes a deal with the devil to live it again. And he gets to go back and, drink and be with women and carouse, but he's got to give up his soul. Then he finds a loophole in the deal. He can have his soul back as long as he doesn't look backwards, as long as he stays in the present. And that, in a way is the highest level, according to mystics. We are talking about mystics today, that's the highest level of mysticism, is to be completely in the present moment.
It sounds like a divine comedy.
It probably is.
Well, let's kick it off with mentalism, because that's sort of the opposite side of the coin. And I like that we put these together, because mentalists are pretty intent on not being called magicians, but also not being called mystics or psychics, which is kind of an interesting little niche in the non-ordinary world of things, because a lot of times what they do is inspire people to ask bigger questions and to think about, expanded consciousness. And a good magician never tells you their tricks, but every once in a while, mentalists certainly do, or they'll flat out tell you that this isn't magic and I'm not really psychic. Of course, there's all varieties of them. I have a fun quote from Penn and Teller explaining mentalism is a genre of magic that exists across a spectrum of morality, which is pretty classic. So some people use this very, very transparently and say, hey, look, I can look like I'm doing magic, but it's magic tricks or whatever. But it's really just producing psychological states and experiences using the mind and imagination and expanding reality through psychology and body language and suggestion and influence and circumstance. And it does take years and years and years to do this, but boy, there have been a lot of famous ones.
Well,
I,
before you get into that, a lot depends on what you believe about things. Okay, so if there's something coiled under the table here and the lights are low, you think it's a snake, you might, get some anxiety going. Turn up the lights, it's a rope. Well, it was always a rope. The idea that we can talk to people, that we can use imagination, imagery, breathing techniques, all kinds of things to create changes in people. Well, as Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And any kind of placebo could be seen as magic, but if it works, I don't know.
but it's kind of interesting that I don't know, is that a dichotomy that they um will say, no, this isn't a magic show. We're not magicians, but this isn't evidence of psychic powers or
Well, if you take the tack and if you're really a mystic, and I suspect you actually are, it's when you can make the ordinary spiritual that you become a mystic. So in essence, if we realize that there's a little bit of God in each of us, let's say I talk to you, I talk to God, you talk to me, you talk to God, we'd be nicer to each other, number one, and we'd be
you
more
look more like
mindful.
Yahweh, but
Okay, whichever one you like, and we would be more mindful if every interaction were seen as a spiritual interaction. And if you just take the do unto others part of the Bible, kind of throw the rest of it away, all of a sudden our ordinary interactions become spiritual. And to me, that's what makes you a mystic, not that you can hear Beldar from Ramulak or something like that.
well, I always hate to like reduce these big topics and themes to some definitions, but sometimes definitions are a good place to
Mhm.
start, especially when you're trying to figure out what something is or separate it from something else. Because I think a lot of people think of mentalism and mysticism as interchangeable,
Right.
which we talked
And
about.
well, I guess, see, to me that there is a space where there's overlap.
Definitely.
I mean, we're going to talk about Mesmer later, and everything depends on how you look at him. I mean, he got people better. Why? Well, you could say, well, he's a mentalist.
But
Yeah,
that was his intention, was to get to help and to get them better, whereas a mentalist is an entertainer primarily,
he
or
was.
someone, yeah, I mean, wouldn't you say they're primarily entertainment?
Yes, yes, they are.
Because they call themselves mentalists, which is arguably a good term, because they, although a lot of times they're trained in magic, they do not like mixing magic in with mentalist shows, because like during a mentalist demonstration or performance, they would be doing the kind of things like hypnotizing people on stage, or demonstrating telepathy, clairvoyance, divination, precognition, psychokinesis. Even, we talked about Uri Geller before the show, bending spoons and stuff like that. Mediumship, mind control, memory feats, deduction, rapid mathematics. Where they bring people up on stage and they couldn't possibly have known this ahead of time, and they come up with all these like supernatural uh, type forces that appear psychic, but they would argue its intention is to be generated or achieved through ordinary conjuring means. Like conjuring makes me think of conjuring spirits, but natural human abilities. But we talked a little bit about body language and the science and the art of that. Refined intuition, subliminal communication, body language, emotional intelligence. All of those factor in to a point, like you said, that the rope looks like a snake. And arguably, some of these people probably do have more of a gift and an overlap with mysticism and a lot of these non-ordinary types of stage magic.
Well,
So,
I went
mental
to a
magic, they
show,
refer
went
it
to
to.
a show with a stage hypnotist, and there were a lot of people in the audience, and he actually picked me to be one of the people on the stage. Now, what I found by doing that, and I'm a reasonably good hypnotic subject. I'm not great. I'm kind of in the middle. But they were going in the audience. They know from eye rolls and other things who the good subjects are. Now, what I realized when I was up on the stage dancing like John Travolta, uh, not exactly like John, something like that. It was a long time ago. Um, that part of it was just the willingness to play along.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, as luck would have it, I was making believe I was John Travolta, and I jumped up and I landed and tore my ACL in front of 1,000 people. It might have been a football
Whoops.
player, and I know my ex said to our friend, he just tore up his knee, and I said, no, he didn't. Yeah, he did. And I got back to the table after the demo, and I went, I tore up my knee. She says, I know. That was from playing along. Okay.
But
Um,
that, you're right, that's an important part. One of the things I said before implied that, but it doesn't explicitly say that, because there is a social expectation that someone who's a
right.
guest during your show is going to unconsciously not get in your face, challenge you, go out of their way to derail,
I'm seeing a
the letter M.
woman in your life. Is there a woman in your life? No, and then it must be a man.
I am a woman.
Something like that.
I mean, so they call it mental magic, and mentalism is considered like a subcategory of magic. They're really uppity about not being called magicians, which I think is kind of funny. I
Well,
don't
I
think.
think the thing that kind of ticks off magicians is these guys don't identify it necessarily as a show.
Well, I'm trying to think. David Copperfield's probably a good example of somebody that's combined mentalism with magic, because that's very unusual. You can find tons of magicians and tons of mentalists, but very few like David Copperfield. I think David Blaine is probably another one that does a lot of you know simultaneous magic with mentalism, and to me it brings on a different show, a bit different fascination.
Well,
Um,
people have interesting abilities. I'm remembering a kid I work with who did this ninjutsu stuff, and he told me that he knew how to hide in plain sight. And I said, all right, go out in the parking lot and hide and see if, yeah. I mean, I literally couldn't see, but I know that he wasn't like casting a spell. He just kind of knew enough about psychology and how to move his body in a certain way. It was really brilliant. I didn't see him until he wanted me to see him.
One of my most memorable mentalism shows that I went to, I was in college, and again, the guy was very transparent about mentalists, and I kind of knew ahead of time, and I was more fascinated in the psychology and this guy. But one of the things that he had said, I forgot. He did something that the answer ended up being the number 68, and the point is, he said, everyone in this room, pay attention over the next 3 days. You're gonna see the number 68 pop up. And sure enough, I saw 68 everywhere for the next 3 days, to the point where I would absolutely have thought, in the absence of any and all other evidence, like, whoa, this is mind control, programming, synchronicity, whatever. But that's a very basic, well-known psychological, bias sampling. I forget the name of it. Actually, probably should have known that, but it just downloaded in me that I remembered that 68 thing. So anybody watching the show, look for the number 68 in the next
Well,
three
I mean,
days, or
there's
don't look for it. It'll find you.
there's mathematical tricks that if you're not privy to them. So if you take any number, multiply it by 9, add those two numbers together, and subtract 5, you're always going to get 4. But you don't know that if you're the not the mentalist. So the
Yeah.
mentalist can go, well, and then put a letter at it. So the letter would be D, and you can construct a whole thing where the person in the audience won't know that this is just simple arithmetic.
Yeah. And math's one of my favorite things, and numbers, and my brain sees things that way. So I think I'm more suggestible than somebody else. Maybe not everyone saw 68 in there, but I certainly know a large percentage, a majority of them did, and were probably a little incredulous or
Well,
ineffable.
it's a hypnotic technique that I use all the time, but I don't tell them to look at 68. I'm going to tell them they're gonna bump into something, and it's going to activate what they need to know.
Yeah.
Well, just trusting that a person's subconscious, when not guarded, will come up with stuff. And I think, in our talk before we doing the show, um, there is a blurry line at times between mentalists and mystics, and let me tell you why. Michael Jordan only hit 45% of his shots. We expect psychics or mystics to hit 100%, and it's like, listen. I've talked to lots of psychics, intuitives, and it's like listening for a whisper in a thunderstorm. Okay, you have to be tuned a little differently, and if you're pushing to get it right every time, that's not the tuning. And I actually saw an interview with Uri Geller, who I mean, I think treads the line that he was actually pretty good as a psychic, but he felt the pressure to get it right every time. So he's in the back bending spoons, and but that he was actually highly intuitive, but not every time. If you're on stage, you got to get it right every time.
Yeah. Well, remember we were talking before the show about James Randi, and kind of, I don't know if the debunker is the right word for it, but one of the things James Randi was famous for saying is in terms of the differentiation or the overlap between a mentalist and a mysticist or a psychic, let's say, is that the mentalist purports to be like I said, an entertainer primarily.
Right.
That they're a skilled artist, or they accomplish their feats through years of study and practice, but are clear it's through natural means. Whereas he even goes so far to say that the opposite, the psychic, is somebody that is presumably a fraud, and therefore what they're doing is unethical because they're pretending to be supernatural psychic or have ESP, and the original tenet of Randi was that doesn't exist. It's not that simple, like you said. I think a lot of them combine magic and mentalism, but then there's a lot of overlap between someone that, quite frankly, may have these skills and someone who totally knows that they don't or doesn't, and then everything in between. People that, like you said, to help their hit rate, say, oh, this is primarily for entertainment. That's what we were talking about John Edwards, who a lot of people in the psychic community absolutely verify he's the real deal. But certainly when he was on the TV and getting famous, everything, he got a lot of backlash of just being a charlatan, and people were really pretty brutal to him. And he's an interesting guy. He's certainly phenomenal at what he does, regardless of how he's doing it, which is quite interesting. One of my favorite TV shows that patients have suggested to me, and I'm usually quite busy, and it's not that I don't hear what they're saying. They'll say, "Oh, hey, you should go watch this show." That happened with Breaking Bad. Oh, go watch Breaking Bad. For years, I kept hearing, "Oh, you'd really like Breaking Bad. It's about this guy who makes meth," because I do a lot of addiction. And I'm like, it does not sound like something that I'm interested in. But I went and watched and kind of got hooked on it and binge watched it like everyone else. But there was another show called Psych. I don't know if you remember this show.
Yes, I do.
Very few people have heard of it. And I guess because it's spelled Psych, people thought of me. But I watched that with zero expectations. And he was a pure mentalist. And it was a hilarious show, very well written. And, the tenet of it is basically Sean Spencer. He's the main character. He's the son of the detective. His father's a real hard ass. But he pretends to be a psychic because he wants to be able to do detective work, and he works at the Santa Barbara Police Department or whatever. But he doesn't want to like have a real job or be like a real detective. So he is so good at what he does, basically because he's got, really great vision, and he's got like a photographic memory, and he has exceptional observation skills as taught by his father, who was a career lifelong um, detective, that he literally looks psychic to everyone who's around him. And Santa Barbara is, pretty progressive and contracts and hires psychic detectives. But the whole tenet of the show is that he's a total fraud and he's lying. Interestingly, he's lying to pretend that he's psychic because he wants to do the work, but without the, following in dad's footsteps. But he is his father. He just does it in kind of a backhanded way. And it makes me think of mentalism, because that's exactly what he does. And every episode was just really well written, how he solved a crime essentially through his psychic visions. So if you haven't watched that show, go watch Psych. PSYCH. It's funny.
But you take the other side of it. You take the show Lie to Me, about a psychologist that is an expert in body language. So what if he didn't say I'm an expert in body language? It would look like magic.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I remember a kid I worked with who was in trouble with the law, and I said, "Is there anything else you're worried about?" And he goes, "No." I said, "So what is it?" I said, "No." I said, "No, you said yes." With his body said yes. It turned out he was. Anyway, what occurs to me is, years ago I did this group with an old friend of mine called uh, uh, Recovery. I can't even remember the name. It was recovery and psychology, basically. And when I would be at the Gratitude Club with about 35 people, and they were 35 mystics. I didn't see 35 alcoholics, recovering alcoholics. I saw 35 mystics who were looking for some answer. They were looking for a feeling. They were looking for an experience that, sort of using a substance brought them kind of, sort of, to that experience, but they couldn't hang on to it. I found it fascinating.
It sounds super fascinating. I wonder if there are still any groups like that, or any.
Well, the thing of it is that I don't think they were just there to hear a lecture about, recovery and psychology and how we could combine the two. What I saw were people looking for a certain answer, and they seemed like mystics to me. They wouldn't have identified themselves that way.
There's a lot of mystical experiences in recovery. Bill W. We talked about Bill W. before, but he talked about kind of that moment of grace. It's sort of this divine clarity, whereas you have insight from outside yourself, and mystical experiences are not uncommon in getting sober and in recovery. We talked about them obviously in hospice and terminal lucidity and some other contexts, but there's definitely a lot of that in substance use. I think it gets thrown out a lot by everyone. Obviously, maybe not the experiencer, but certainly the family. Like, yeah, sure, you're having a mystical experience. It's called heroin. You're all hopped up on methamphetamine. And so they kind of write it off, but it's a really important ingredient in somebody not only getting sober, but staying sober, having that psychic shift that Bill W. talked about.
The one thing that I got out of doing that group more than anything else was how much recovery was a spiritual journey. Stan Groff wrote a book, The Stormy Search for the Self, Addiction as a mystical road, something like that. And it became more clear than ever to me that we ignore mysticism, non-ordinary mind, to coin a phrase, in our everyday life at our own peril. that we deny a part of ourselves that is very, very valuable in terms of human interaction. I mean, I don't know if you ever had the experience of running a group where people talked about their dreams. Well, I have. It was really interesting. They were essentially communicating mystical events while they were asleep. And it was fascinating to see how they connected with this.
Maybe it was harder to conceal, or there was less of a more permission not to
Yes, there
conceal if
was
it's a
no
dream.
stigma. You could
Right,
dream, you could
right.
dream, oh yeah, well, I was dreaming I was at the top of a mountain and a light came down and, and Jesus told me I had a mission and isn't that a cool dream? Yeah, and I had the other one where it was a hot dog running through the Holland Tunnel or, something like that.
Well, do you know what mysticism means in the ancient Greek? And when it was the term was originally coined, it means to conceal, which I kind of find interesting.
Well, it's no doubt that why would they call it the occult? Which
The
is,
hidden.
yeah, it's very similar. And things like Kabbalah were only communicated verbally. Kabbalah
Mhm.
wasn't written down, I think, till the 1970s. A rabbi, Philip Berg, wrote a book called Kabbalah for the Layman. And they felt it was too powerful to give to people who weren't ready. But that was the ostensible reason. Maybe they just didn't feel like giving it to people who
Kind of
weren't their
like
family members.
unplugging from the Matrix. Most people
Something like
wouldn't do
that,
well if you just yanked them out Neo style.
yeah. Yes.
Would you say a good synonym for mysticism is spirituality? Maybe not good, but in the ballpark, because
Well, we live in a time where we talk about asymptomatic, and that could be healthy too. Mysticism, to me, if it's not spiritual, I don't see how it's really mystical. And if it's not mystical, I don't really see how it's spiritual.
well, one requirement is it definitely has to have a religious or spiritual meaning, the mystical event, but it could be any kind of altered state. It could be ecstasy. It could be basically anything that you assign to have a religious or spiritual meaning behind it.
It doesn't have to have
It's just an old word.
doesn't have to have any particular religion though.
No, but it has to have either a religious and or spiritual context to be
And and I
mystical.
go back to one of my favorite little stories about the devotee and the guru. And the devotee says to the guru, Master, I wish to learn enlightenment. So the guru says, okay, inhale, exhale, go home and try it. So the devotee is very eager and he's inhaling, exhaling for 1 hour, 2 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. And then a bolt of lightning comes into his hut and floating in front of him is a jewel encrusted Buddha engulfed in flames. And he goes running to the guru and he says, Guru, I've had the most marvelous experience of the Buddha. What a vision. And the guru says, inhale, exhale. I'm sure it'll go away.
Mhm.
The idea is not that these experiences are what's most important. It's being able to handle life that becomes a mystical event. It's being able to be in the moment with people who are not always so easy.
Yeah, and the mysticism, I think, is by definition it's found in every religion because of that. Because I mean, even the indigenous religions, polytheism, monotheism, all of them have mystical, not even just undertones. I would say probably overtones.
Well,
If you
yeah,
looked at
well,
the
how are you
very,
going to get people interested unless there's something hidden that they're looking to uncover? They want the secret.
but even
You
shamanism,
got the secret, right? You give me
yeah,
the secret
the
decoder ring
mystery.
and password.
It's the question that drives us, Neo. I mean, the mystery of it, and shamanism tends to be more like faith healing or curanderos, or but even shamanism's loaded with mystical symbolism and beliefs, and um, the
Oh,
Abrahamic faiths, Indian religions. But we could
oh,
literally
I
go through
knew
every
a
religion.
very, I knew a very powerful curandera in Puerto Rico, and attorneys would hire her to come into court and scramble the mind of the other attorney. And who knows? Sometimes I guess she just walked in the room and the other, she's here.
Yeah, I think the word implies to me something probably deeper than it is. Like the first thing that pops in my mind when I think of mysticism, I don't know why, is like the Haitian beliefs,
You mean like voodoo kind of stuff?
magical beliefs. Yeah. And I don't know why, because those seem to have a different flavor. You know, Santeria, stuff like that has a very different flavor than the clouds parting or more allegorical, mystical parables that are usually on in the literature or the dogma of a religion. But you could literally go through every religion that man has ever, dare I say, invented, but you could literally go through all of them. And we were talking about this. There's some that I think are just more entertaining or more well known, so that like the viewers can say, "Oh yeah," like you mentioned the Kabbalah, or even before that, the Merkabaism. Um, a lot of the Vedic texts of the Indian religions, certainly early Christianity, modern
Well, you can
Christianity.
just look at the word religion is re-ligon, relink to some experience that a master had. The idea, though, is that we've lost the concept that we're all have the potential to go to that world, that we don't necessarily need to have a priest do it for us. It's another sort of lazy concept in our society. And in fact, any spiritual path that does not encourage it, personal relationships with God or whatever, and doesn't have a framework, is not going to, you're not going to have those experiences. I was talking with someone who was thinking of taking ayahuasca. And I said, well, you know, if you grew up in South America, you know who Mescalito is.
Well,
You know what to expect.
I thought you were going to say that they talk about the vision quests in America, in which one drinks Bud Light or something.
Well, I mean, I know people that have gone on true vision quests, like they go off into the desert, for 3 days, and if you're being subjected to some pretty harsh conditions and you don't have anybody to talk to, books to read, TV, you're going to have an interesting experience. I wouldn't necessarily say mystical. I mean, I don't know if you
Sensory
remember.
deprivation.
Yeah, something like you remember Primal Scream? I mean, all they did was they put these guys in a room by themselves with no TV, no radio, no nothing, and a pad and a pencil, and said, write until you get something. Well, I think if I was in there for 3 days, I'd start screaming too, I don't know.
Well, I've found starvation and dehydration help me hallucinate. When I get lost in the desert for 3 days.
It might take more than three, you never know. Anyway, every spiritual path has something like this in there. And the people go and, they go and there's some kind of deprivation, there's some kind of trial, they have a vision, they're transformed. It's pretty standard stuff. I mean, even Jesus goes into the desert to purge himself of demons attacking him, I guess. It's always, and it seems to be mystical, magical numbers. They go for 40 days. It's the seventh heaven. It's three. So we're dealing with. It's almost as if the things that you and I are talking about today are almost archetypes that serve some kind of psychological developmental value, because this is cross-cultural.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It has something like it, and maybe not everywhere has the TV or the internet where you can see Kreskin or somebody like that, or even a magician like Penn and Teller, who will out front say, well, we're doing magic and we're not going to tell you how we do it. Every culture has their shamans and their mystics and their medicine people.
Yeah, probably more modern examples of mysticism would be like Gnosticism, Transcendentalism, Theosophy, the Fourth Way, nature mysticism. A lot of people really find nature very mystical. whether that's isolation with nature in a desert type of thing, or being among the redwoods and feeling like you can hear these trees breathing or sense their presence.
You know what occurs to me as we're going through this material, and I really am enjoying the hell out of this. If you go to a mentalist, let's say, and he identifies it, I'm going to do something special here. I'm not going to tell you how I do it. If you're inspired to go beyond your ordinary mind, I think it's a good thing. I think if a young person is going, how the hell did they do that? You know, and inspires them to learn more about the mind, because that's what we're doing. So let's say the mentalist is really good at reading body language. Cool. You know,
It is
learn how to.
cool. It is cool because that's what a good teacher does, right? I mean, I have little kids and I see how they learn. I see what motivates and inspires and intrigues them and fascinates them. And that's really across the board, age or subject. A good teacher will uh, first and foremost stimulate interest in their student. And I think that's a phenomenal thing because it intrigues people to lean in, look closer, and hey, what's going on here? This is pretty cool. I want to know more about that. And that's why we include mentalism and why I like it as a topic in spirituality or mysticism, because it can have maybe it isn't the unintended effect, but certainly one of the effects is ironically and contradictorily, kind of paradoxically, an interest in the mystical.
Or
So
even in just sort of the abilities a human being could have. You know, the tack that I'm taking, and I think you're with me, is all the things we talk about. They may not be um, conventional. We use the term non-ordinary. They're all part of being human. And the more we expand our humanity and don't negate that this is part of humanity. So let's say a person who's a mentalist, they get really good at reading people. Well, is there any intuition connected to it? Probably, yeah. At what point does one start and the other, end? Who knows? It's a mystery, right?
that's the mist
It's the mist.
in mystical. Um, we didn't really dive into Hinduism too much, but Hinduism was uh, very ripe and filled with a lot of mystical um, icons, really, and ideals. You know, the prana, um, all of this. And then the reason why I mentioned Hinduism is because what fascinates me about that in terms of mysticism is its ability to evoke that in so many different areas of of the basis or its own dogma.
I
It's
mean,
like
Mesmer talked
everywhere.
about animal magnetism. Is that really different from prana? I mean, I don't.
Or in the Native Americans connection with them as well.
Chinese medicine talking about qi. Uh, Wilhelm Reich went to jail for talking about orgone and making orgone collectors. Who knows? There's more to our, what did Shakespeare? There's more to heaven and earth than's been explained by our science, Horatio.
Hmm.
So, welcome to 2021, everyone.
If you compare Hinduism and Buddhism, I'd say Hinduism is much more mystical.
Yeah, Buddhism is sort of practical. Buddhism is more like a psychology.
Yeah,
And I know that because I studied with a Buddhist scholar for a couple of years, and he said, anything that I tell you that doesn't match your life experience, throw away. I said, what kind of religion is this? You get to throw stuff away,
but the goal is still nirvana, which is arguably mystical
I don't
rather
think
than
there's any.
psychological.
Well, actually, my teacher, he didn't think nirvana was the goal. He said nirvana was it was like spiritual materialism. He said the goal was awareness in the moment, which maybe that's nirvana.
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness, yeah. That's
Okay.
what his
That's not really nirvana, but
he said nirvana was a cycle that people went through. You would hit the nirvana and you'd be
but the nirvana is the omega. It's the holy grail.
Okay.
It's the pinnacle of enlightenment.
Well, my guy said, well, enlightenment, how do you know if you'll like it?
If it
you
feels
might not like it,
Well, this is all good topic, interesting stuff, and I hope people think about this in their day and day life and being present in the moment to really experience something or to think about a bigger purpose or bigger meaning, or hey, why is that intriguing, or why am I acting or thinking this way? Sort of the unexamined life is generally not worth living. And I kind of feel like with the pandemic and election and so much fear dripping off of the walls like ectoplasm, boy, that really blinds people's sentience and awareness of themselves first and their own consciousness. And just like you said, forgetting the basic fact that we're all one, we're all connected. Um, when I am talking to you, I'm talking to me, and vice versa. I think that people would be a heck of a lot more healthy and happy if we awoke to that. And to me, that's one of the goals of getting through this tough time in people's life and the new normal. I'm hoping if there's a new normal, it does include a greater expansion of consciousness and awareness. In all of the forms that we've talked about, but we're going to have a little fun next week talking about hallucinations and delusions. But don't worry, this isn't going to be like a psychiatry lesson on hallucinations and delusions, because I could do that in about 5 minutes. We'll go down the rabbit hole like we always do. So,
okay, so now remember, everybody, 1, 2, 3, 4.
be well.
Oh, I was going to say be healthy. I missed.
It's our motto.
Again.
It's on the door and everything, man.
Be well. Did I get it right?
I just lip sync it when you say it. Maybe we ought to try a different tact.
1, 2, 3. Be well.
Nope,
hey,
that didn't work either.
Not bad. Okay.
It was awful. It was awful.
See everybody next week.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Stay out of the newspapers.
I'll do my best.